All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously dark philosophical deep dive into a grim Gothic fable. We're looking at a profound story of destruction and rebirth that maps out the terrifying emergence of what our sources call the Proto-Ubermensch. This isn't your standard swords and sorcery tale, folks. We're talking about a total mapping of human psychology using the incredibly intense frameworks of Nietzschean philosophy and the Fichtean dialectic to show what happens when an entire worldview completely collapses. Our whole fable hinges on this one catastrophic moment. It's a strike that totally incinerates the protagonist's reality. The source text describes this as the volcanic emergence of a hidden fire that shattered his illusions of objective meaning. I mean, what a striking image, right? It perfectly sets the stage for a journey where literally every truth our knight held dear is burned to the ground. So let's dive into this and look at the actual foundation that had to be destroyed.
Chapter 1: The Armor of Reason.
To really grasp this psychological fable, we've got to start with our philosophical thesis. Our Knight of Reason originally lived in a state built entirely on an Apollonian drive for order. Now, in philosophy, the Apollonian is all about structure, logic, and keeping things predictable. But as our sources reveal, this seemingly perfect, shining armor was actually an artificial ego. It was essentially a sterile tomb designed to deny the wild, chaotic flames of actual existence. He was living inside this illusion of a perfectly predictable world, just totally shielded from the terrifying unpredictability of real life. And to keep that illusion alive, the knight relied heavily on what the text calls slave morality. This is basically a system of comforting lies used to justify hollow suffering, seeking permission to just exist through some external divine decree. The reason he defended so fiercely, it was really just a mask covering up the absolute nothingness underneath. It's a concept that challenges us to look impartially at our own frameworks, you know? It asks us to consider how often we build incredibly fragile belief systems just to avoid facing the unknown. Chapter 2: The Crimson Jungian Chadar. But a thesis can't just stand unchallenged forever, which brings us to our antithesis. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict of our entire fable. On one side, you have the Knight of Reason, strict Apollonian order and that artificial ego. On the other side, his absolute antithesis, the Crimson Jester. The Jester represents Dionysian chaos, the unpredictable, wild energy of life. But more importantly, he's the literal manifestation of the Jungian shadow. He is all those primal, irrational instincts the Knight desperately tried to bury beneath his armor. When these two forces finally clash, it is violent, but not in a physical way. When the Jester's blade strikes, it doesn't spill a drop of blood. Instead, it triggers this profound, agonizing psychological collapse. The source describes the aftermath as a descent into the absolute, purifying void of nihilism. The knight's entire worldview is hollowed out, leaving his once proud kingdom of logic as nothing more than ashes without any inherent purpose. Now, looking at this impartially, absolute nihilism isn't just about being sad or cynical. It is the total vacuum created when objective moral laws and dogmatic ideals actually die. In this state, there are no enemies anymore, because there is no objective truth to fight over. This intense philosophical state completely incinerates the vanity of believing that human existence has some preordained cosmic purpose. Chapter 3: Synthesis. The Unholy Resurrection. Let's map out exactly how this Fichtean dialectic resolves through the knight's psychological death and unholy resurrection. First, we get the total collapse of his constructed reality. Second, that descent into the void of absolute nihilism we just talked about. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, is the integration of the shadow. He stops fighting the Jester and actually absorbs that chaos. And finally, from that integration, we witness the emergence of the will to power. The source text calls the result of this a monstrous synthesis. The knight isn't striving for pure order anymore, but he hasn't succumbed to pure chaos either. Instead, he accepts his internal chaos as a vital creative force. He still wears the armor of reason, but now it's cracked. It serves merely as a vessel to contain the wild flame of the Dionysian abyss. It's this fiery, paradoxical fusion of logic and primal instinct. Which brings us to the foundational definition for this explainer, the Proto-Ubermensch. This is what the knight has become. He is now a sovereign individual, born directly from the burning wreckage of his old identity. And he defines his sovereignty through destruction. He possesses the terrifying strength required to tear down old, static laws, rather than just blindly obeying them. Chapter 4: Smashing the Old Tablets. A psychological rebirth this intense is obviously going to leak out into the external world. This quote really nails the dramatic essence of his new state. The knight hasn't magically stumbled upon some new set of objective truths. No, he's found the terrifying strength to smash the old tablets and command his own chaos. Those old tablets are traditional, rigid moral laws. He is no longer an enforcer of someone else's rules. He is a creator of his own values. So the crucial point here is how this inner fire incinerates even sterile linguistic constructs. This is where Nietzschean philology really comes into play. In the knight's old reality, the world was strictly divided by a moralistic framework of good versus evil. But in the vacuum of his new reality, those concepts lose all their moral weight. They revert to what the sources call archaic noble meanings, shifting the dichotomy entirely to strong versus weak. Let's look at this philological transvaluation completely impartially. Under this new framework, the word good drops any association with moral purity or self-sacrifice. Instead, good just means whatever is strong, vital, and life-affirming. On the flip side, bad doesn't mean evil or sinful anymore. It simply means whatever is weak, stagnant, and decaying. Language itself has effectively rotted away and been reborn in the heat of his transformation. Chapter 5. The Godless Wasteland. So, after this total linguistic and moral collapse, what is left? Well, it's a bleak but creatively fertile reality. The landscape he wanders is described as the ashes of a kingdom. In this realm, life isn't measured by objective truth, and it definitely isn't held back by social guilt. Instead, existence becomes a dark Dionysian dance fueled entirely by a self-justifying will to power. Without external laws to tie him down, the knight moves completely freely through the ruins of his former dogmas. And that brings us to the ultimate test of this wasteland. The text notes that in this realm, a life is measured solely by its capacity to endure the silence of a godless universe. The proto-Ubermensch doesn't need applause. He doesn't need divine approval or any external validation whatsoever. The ultimate measure of his newfound strength is simply his ability to stand in total existential silence, completely alone with his internal chaos, and remain unbroken. Ultimately, this Gothic fable of the knight and the jester is way more than just some abstract philosophical exercise. It's a mirror held right up to the artificial egos we all construct for ourselves. It challenges us to examine our own rigid rules, our own slave moralities, and those Jungian shadows we try so desperately to hide. So, I'll leave you with this question to chew on. If your constructed reality completely collapsed today, leaving you in that purifying void, would you have the strength to command your own chaos and endure the silence?